Hello, friends. Good morning / afternoon, and welcome to another episode of me trying to save the world. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, but today I have a very special guest joining us because it's gonna be my second time. Well, technically second time, but second time interviewing a third-party candidate today. I'm so excited to get into this. For those of you who don't know, I've been kind of trying to show you guys the fact that there are other options besides Biden and Trump for 2024 elections. I feel like there's a very limited media coverage of the fact that we have other options, and we're all so bought into the duopoly of Republican and Democrat that we forget and we don't realize that there are other options. So today I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Cornel West. I am super excited to speak with him. I've been doing some research just because I'm trying to get into each one of these candidates and bring them to you and speak to them and talk with them about their policy ideas, their general stances on things in the world and what's going on, so that us as voters can be more educated about our choices and we can be more precise about what we want. Because right now I see a lot of conversation around not wanting to vote for Trump for obvious reasons, and then not wanting to vote for Biden for obvious reasons, in the way that he's handled this genocide and the way that things have been going in this country. Granted, 4 years is always something, it's stints that they hand off to one another. You know what I mean? So whatever one was doing, one has to clean up. And it's kind of like a back and forth of all those things. However, I personally am 0% interested in voting for war criminals. I'm 0% interested in voting for racists. I'm 0% interested in voting for people who are continuing to try to consolidate the power of the billionaire class and take away power from the people and the working class people and everyday people who are living right now in America, who are having to go through so much currently. We are seeing so many different things happen at once, and it can be really difficult to see how they're intersectionally connected. And I just have a really deep feeling that if everyone who feels the way that I do, if everyone who feels misrepresented, anyone who feels like we have this forced choice between two criminals. I really want to create a space where we're having conversations outside of that, where we're educating ourselves about the options that we have. So we're not just all rallying behind an undecided choice or this choice, but we're actually seeking out who it is that we want to invest our attention, our time, our energy, our money into as leadership in this country. And I don't believe that we are in a position where we have no power. I believe that we actually are in one of the most prestigious positions on this planet as Americans, as United States citizens. And I really believe that if we harness our energy and we really focus on educating ourselves about our options and organizing ourselves to do something effective, then we have other choices and we have better options, and we can do that. And I think for me, it's a third party representative when it comes to the presidency. And then it's also about focusing in on our local elections and making sure that we are voting for people who are not backed by AIPAC and, wealthy PACs and lobbyists, pharmaceutical lobbyists, gun lobbyists, all of those kinds of things. It's so vital and so important to see who is funding these politicians, who is funding their campaign, because donors are the deciders at the end of the day. So I'm really grateful to welcome Dr. Cornel West into this space with us today. I want to pick his brain. I want him to tell you about himself so that you can get a sense of who he is and what he's up to and how we can help put him on the ballot across the country. Because the thing with a lot of these third-party candidates, not all of them, but some of them, they need your assistance in order to make sure that they are on the ballot. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that today. And yeah, I'm going to invite him into the chat. Let's do it. So we can come in to the chat with us. Hello.
All right. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very, very much indeed. Salute you and your loved ones. Salute you and your family and things.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Dr. West. Everybody say hello.
Oh, indeed, indeed. I salute your artistic achievements and salute your willingness to speak out on a variety of issues. It's so very important when you have this kind of magnificent platform to try to tell the truth across the board. You know what I mean?
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. I value that really deeply about you and your platform as well. So I'm really grateful to have you on here. Thank you so much for agreeing to take the time to speak to these folks, whoever it is that ends up watching this. I'm trying to do what I can through all the censorship and stuff, but I feel like it's really important for young Americans to really understand what they have as options. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of the time the media tends to fearmonger and drive the conversation away from, exploring our options and expanding our ability to understand one another and create and like even imagine what the world could look like. I feel like it even limits our imagination. We can't even sit and wonder what could happen if we try something different or a different route of leadership. So I thank you so much for coming here today and for wanting to talk to the folks about your mission and what you are here to do. Um, so first and foremost, I wanted to just say that Dr. West is a professor. Okay, he's a former university professor at Harvard University, and he's a professor emeritus at emeritus. Am I saying that right?
Emeritus.
Emeritus. Here we are. I didn't go to Princeton, so at Princeton University, and he graduated magna cum laude from Harvard in 3 years and obtained his MA and PhD in philosophy at Princeton. So he's a very intelligent man, and we are so grateful to have him running. I love an intellectual running for presidency. That sounds really good to me. So yeah, I would love for you to tell the people about yourself. Where are you from? What got you into this position that you're in right now? And what made you want to run for president?
No, indeed, indeed. Well, I mean, first, I do want to acknowledge the ways in which the rich legacies of the Nina Simones and the Gil Scott Herons and the Curtis Mayfields are part of what it means to be an artist. And so when someone like yourself speaks up, you're talking about a tradition of people who are willing to talk about the truth and to try to be consistent across the board, right? They could be in Southside Chicago, they could be in Cuba, they could be our precious Palestinians in Gaza, they could be our precious Iranian sisters dealing with repression, it could be dealing with Korea, it can be in Brazil, now of course it could be in Sudan, of course it can be in the Congo. We try to be morally consistent as artists who are speaking the truth, and that's what I'm deeply inspired by. You see, I'm a John Coltrane kind of brother in terms of a love supreme. A love supreme cuts across national boundaries, and that's what my campaign essentially is. It's a campaign that's fundamentally committed to truth, my dear sister. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, anybody's suffering, no matter what color, no matter what gender, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter what religious or non-religious identity, no matter what national affiliation. It's a profoundly human thing. Now, this is domination or oppression we must resist. No matter what those structures are, we got to keep track of the humanity of people, but most importantly, we never allow the oppression to have the last word. Sometimes all you can do is sing a song. Sometimes all you can do is crack a smile or crack a joke. Other times you hit the street, go to jail, you demonstrate. Other times you sustain organizational capacity, bring power and pressure to bear on status quo. But it's fundamentally about the truth tied to justice, and justice is what love looks like in public. So it's very much a love affair. It's compassion. You have a care and a concern for people who are, in the language of Malcolm X, catching hell, no matter who they are.
Hmm. I completely agree. I feel like that's deeply my politic in that like people always ask me like, why do you care about this stuff? Why do you care about this? Why do you care about that? And they isolate things about that I care about. And then I'm just like, I actually just have a fundamental core um truth inside of me that I believe that all life, all sentient life, including our planet, is valuable and precious and created in God's image. And I really genuinely believe that it is our job as stewards on this planet and of one another and of ourselves to protect each other, to protect each other, to create systems or dismantle systems. For me, it's more about creation than it is dismantling at this point because I really don't, I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit of a nihilist at this point.
Oh, you know,
but but I also like the reason that I'm having this conversation with you even is the concept of third party, the concept of having something outside of the systems that we're being fed is really important to me. Like the idea that we can imagine a reality where we don't have to just give up our people power to these institutions or this like psychological warfare of keeping us separated from one another and in this constant bilateral division of just like this is what we stand for and this is what we stand for, and even though neither one of us stands for what we say we're standing for, we all stand for our donors actually. Like, you know, that back and forth I feel like just keeps people in such a place of disempowerment, you know, because they're not educated about their choices. They're not aware of the fact that we can choose something different and that we can really start to imagine the world that we would prefer to live in. And I think that that's you, like you mentioned Nina Simone and like all of the organizers of that time, the Angela Davises of the world, and like all of these people who were envisioning and imagining as they were actively fighting things, you know what I mean? And I
uh,
feel like we're just in another iteration of that um in this moment. And so yeah, I find it really important for us to imagine outside of what we've been given, you know?
yeah, I was blessed to actually work with the great Arturo O'Farrill. In fact, we won a Grammy together a couple of years ago for Latin Jazz Orchestra. His father, Chico, of course, founder of Afro Latin Jazz, along with Dizzy Gillespie and a few others. And what they were fundamentally about was not just bringing people together at the deepest artistic level, but they were also about using their imagination to authorize a better future. So that, for example, in politics, if your only choice is between a bona fide gangster that's pushing the country toward the second civil war and a president leading the world toward World War III, that's Trump versus Biden. You've got to be able to use your imagination and empathy to conceive of a world beyond just Civil War II and World War III. And they said, well, those are the only choices we have. We know both of them are evil, but we have no other choice. And you say, well, who says we don't have any other choice?
Who told you that?
You got to use your imagination, conceive of what things are different. In the 1850s, with Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, they had to choose between a liberal slaveholder and a conservative slaveholder. And of course, the black folk, they couldn't vote, but they became part of the Liberty Party. It was the third party because they refused to have to choose between two slaveholders. And that's crucial. And that Liberty Party, part of the abolitionist movement, it was a small number at that time, but it led toward what? The abolition of slavery. And everybody thought, well, you got the chance of a snowball, and hell of overthrowing slavery has been in place for hundreds of years. That's true. Patriarchy been in place, transphobia been in place, homophobia been in place, a whole lot of ideologies dehumanizing people been in place. Does that mean you don't imagine a different world and fight for it with every fiber of your being?
Amen.
Well, that's what my campaign is about. That's what we've been about. Lord have mercy, and it's something that we're quite unapologetic about. You see, we believe that if we quit dreaming and if we quit authorizing grander futures, then all we have is nihilism. All we have is fatalism. All
Yeah.
we have is cynicism. And that's nobody can live a life based on nihilism, fatalism, and cynicism. You can't sing a song based on that.
I agree. I feel like it's having a huge effect on the mental health of the youth of this country, to be honest. Like when we talk about this is my issue with a lot of the things that we talk about as a collective here in the United States, is that we very rarely draw parallels and connections between why things are happening. You know what I mean? Like we're not drawing a parallel between a dirty environment, water, food that's poisoned, all of these things, and the health crisis that we're all in on a regular basis. You know, like the fertility rates and what's going on with women's wombs. There's not a single girl that I know my age who doesn't have something going on with her womb. And if you ask me, that has a lot to do with our environmental things, like what's in our food, why don't we have clean water, why are we fighting to have clean air, why are we fighting, like someone like Biden who says that they're going to push ahead and, you know, for Green New Deal and start and be the most, you know, proactive president for climate change, and then signs the what was it, the pipeline that he signed off on, like
Yes,
it's
but
like
it was the infrastructure bill that he supposedly was promoting because it's going to provide better competition with China.
which is just
But it downplayed the ecological dimension. It downplayed the fact that there's an ecological catastrophe already in the making. But a lot of that has to do with the point you made about the donors and the benefactors and the big money givers. And
yeah,
that with organized greed. You see, when you get organized greed on steroids, which is basically what we have in the predatory capitalist system that we live in, it's
absolutely.
all about short-term profit. Short-term profit. Fossil fuel company, short-term profit. Wall Street,
Companies.
right across the board. And it's also in the in the artistic industries too, in the music industry and so forth. We see these artists. You all cultivated your gifts. You come in, we looking for short-term profit. You say, well, we've got callings, not just careers. We want to speak some truths in our music. We want to speak some truths in at the workplace. So work has become an afterthought because they're just utilities to be manipulated in order to generate short-term profit. And it was Wu-Tang Clan that said cream, right? Cash
Yeah,
rules
you
everything
know around me.
around me, but doesn't have to rule me. It's around me. You see, those geniuses from Staten Island, they always left open resistance and resilience. And the beautiful news, the good news, is that that's what we see all around the world. People are rising up. They're shattering their sleepwalking. They're building on different kinds of moral and spiritual awakenings. And by awakenings, we're not just talking about, self-righteous do-gooders. No, no. By awakenings, we're talking about people who are seeing things they hadn't seen before, feeling deeper they hadn't felt before, straighten their backs up with courage and decide to fight. And
Yeah.
that means being fortified. You see, a lot of young brothers and sisters come up to me and say, Brother West, I want to stay woke. I say, well, you don't want to suffer from insomnia now. You don't want to be woke all day and all night. You want to be fortified. So what you see and feel enables you to act more courageously and compassionately with others in movements, in motion, in momentum, in light of the best of your history. We can learn something from our mamas and daddies and and grandmamas and granddaddies and so forth and teachers, but it's got to be critically filtered. You see, with the schools that we went to, we can learn some things, but oh no, we got to critically filter that. Now, this Catholic school, this Presbyterian school, this Baptist school, and so forth, they taught me some things about the image of God and what it means to have dignity, but they also had too much patriarchy. They also had too much homophobia and transphobia. They also were too accommodated to the status quo. So I can keep track of the best and call into question the worst, because all of us have to fall back on something.
Mhm.
None of us just show up clean slate, as it were. None of us are born woke.
Unfortunately, yeah. Ironically, I do think we are born woke, and then we're learned. Like we are indoctrinated into this divisiveness and this this concept of like separation, where especially in America, I feel like individualism is such a rugged part. It's such an integral part of the model, the business model,
Mhm.
because the further disconnected we all are from ourselves and from our immediate community, the easier it is to convince us that someone in Palestine, for example, does not deserve our advocation. I've seen so many people talk about like, oh well, why should I give a fuck about them if they don't care about me, if they wouldn't do this for me, or they wouldn't have the capacity to do this for me. And that right there is such it's such a point that is so ingrained in so many of us of like, well, if I can't benefit from something, then I have no desire to be a part of it, or to advocate for it, or to move for it. And we see that when it comes to like boomers being like, no, not don't erase their college debt because I had to pay all my student loans back, so they got to do it too, like
Yeah.
this constant just like, well, if I had to, then you have to. And it's all suffering based. It's all like, oh well, if I had to suffer, then you have to suffer, or even better, I don't have to suffer, you have to suffer so that I don't suffer, and so I'm okay with your suffering because it means that I don't have to suffer.
Oh, yeah, that's just downright callous. That's just cold, cold blooded. But see, I think that,
But it's so ingrained in this society is what I keep seeing.
yeah, oh no, I mean, it's pervasive. I mean, the routinized indifference to the vulnerable. But you see, I think if we go back to little
Indifference to the
baby,
vulnerable.
children do have a sense of wonder, they have a sense of awe, they have a sense of openness. But children also have a narcissism that needs to be transformed into the kind of universalism that you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. I don't think babies just instinctively are connected to solidarity with babies around the world. See, they got to be taught that they are
Mm-hmm.
socially shaped in such a way that it gets beyond their tribalism. It gets beyond just my group or even just one group. If you really believe that a precious baby anywhere in the world, as I was talking about before, no matter where it is, no matter what the system is, right? If you really believe that, then you've got to go beyond just the childishness of a baby. We preserve the childlikeness. The childlikeness is the wonder and the awe and the openness. But the only way you overcome childishness is through education, through exposure, especially through arts and music. See that, because when you sing a song, you sing into the heart and soul of every human
Yeah,
being.
I say that all the time. It's like one of the things that I love the most about art is that, like, if I'm giving a show and I'm on stage, I'm singing my lyrics out to a crowd, there's hundreds of people singing those lyrics back to me. For whatever reason, their hearts resonate with those lyrics.
And at that point, they're not really obsessed with what color they are, what their gender is, or what their
Yeah,
sexual orientation is. They try to be free human beings in light of who they are and how they can become even more fortified and better,
absolutely.
more spiritually, artistically. Now, see, that's the dream.
Mm-hmm.
But can you imagine the history of the human species without those kind of dreams? The greed would have taken over, the hatred would have taken over, the fear would have taken over, the envy, the resentment, the all the things we know go into making who we are. Because we're a wretched species in so many ways.
We
We got to be honest.
are. We really are.
We're wretched, but we're also wonderful.
Too many of us. Like,
We oh no, I know I got a lot of gangster in me. I've been around for a long time, but I can acknowledge that and fight it every day
yeah,
and be and acknowledge I can't do it by myself.
yeah,
I mean, that's one of the things about art. That art says, look, you sing not just for yourself and to yourself. You can under certain circumstances, but usually you're singing to others. You're sharing something inside of you, all of the deep, dark corners of your own soul, and transfiguring that into a sound that empowers others, other souls, other persons. And that's one of the great callings of an artist. And that's why artists are always dangerous for any status quo.
I
Always.
completely agree. I feel like we're seeing a collective conversation right now, kind of holding celebrity a little bit more accountable in this moment. It's been 8 months since this genocide began in Palestine. And, I feel like over the past couple days, I've seen a lot more people just kind of like feel fired up to be a part of the conversation. But I would be remiss to have not noticed that so many artists are choosing in this moment to be silent and choosing to not,
Okay.
choosing short-term profits to,
Yes.
to long-term impact and legacy. And to me, the role of the artist, I put this at the, I wrote a song back in October about what's going on right now. It's called The Day the World Blows Up. And at the end, there's a quote from Nina Simone that talks about like I don't know how, like being an artist is speaking to the times. You know what I mean? Is to be present with the times, is to speak to the times, is to capture it, is to emote it, is to be a part of it. Because like you said, no one can reach the spirits of a populace more than an artist, and that's why our role is so vital. And to me, I look to, you know, the revolutionary artists of the 60s, and I'm like, that's the kind of artist that I want to be, you know, like that I want to be in this world and impact it in such a way where, like right now, I'm using my platform for us to have this conversation because I think it's so important to drive people to expand their imaginations. If nothing else comes from it, to me, these conversations are so important for people to know there's choices, for people to explore their own power, you know, outside of what they're told to be and outside of the boxes that we're put into as a society to uphold these these systems. Because the second that we step out of our boxes that they've placed us in, we start to dismantle things and we start to build new things and we start to envision new realities and bring them to fruition. Because, you know, there's this seeming intangibility or this inability to connect the imagination with the tangible, because we're all so used to this destructive world, this extractive world, these power dynamics of push and pull and dominion and submissiveness. And it's like, they're not necessary for life to thrive. They are implemented so that a certain percentage of people, a certain group of people, can have this advantageous experience of life while subjugating everyone else below them to wretchedness, like you were talking about. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there is no need for suffering on this planet. I think there's a huge divide between, like, there's necessary violence. To me, there's a necessary violence is of like, you know, we got to stay fed, we got to give birth, you know, in order to come and leave the world is pretty violent.
Right.
But all of the in-between violence that we do is a choice. It's a conscious choice to subjugate a certain people, to subjugate a certain person, a certain gender, a certain whatever, so that there's this concept of superiority in play that allows for these systems to maintain themselves. Because without that concept of someone feeling inherently superior to another, these systems don't thrive. These systems don't even function, you know, because we're interconnected as a species on this planet. We are interconnected even with the environment around us. Like I said, I believe that because our environment is not being taken care of, like we're not actually taking care to make sure the water is clean nationwide, to make sure that, you know, that our fields are properly mineralized and nourished so that our food has actual minerals and vitamins in it. You know what I'm saying? Like, these kinds of things, they directly reflect in us as a society when we're sick in the mind, sick in the body, and are unable to like transcend it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Very much so. Again, you know, for me, it really comes down to the ways in which greed tries to rationalize itself. Greedy bosses, greedy
Mm,
supremacists, greedy male supremacists, greedy homophobes and transphobes and so forth. That greed rationalizes itself by trying to argue that people are less than so that they can go on about their way with their greed. So the hatred and the greed are both organized and intertwined. Now, unfortunately, it's primarily taken the form of the last 400 years of capitalist mode of production, but even before, it was feudalism. Before, there was some other systems that were still trying to rationalize human greed,
mm,
crushing other people's humanity, crushing other people's possible liberty and freedom. And all of these systems of oppression and systems of domination have developed over time, always resisted. But usually the vanguard are the artists, because the artists are those who usually have enough courage. They straighten their backs up and say, you know, I don't like the state of affairs. I have a freedom dream, in the language of Robert, my dear brother Kelly. I have a freedom dream that takes us beyond the present. Now, what happens? Usually, the response: dissent generates suppression. Suppression, like you talked about Nina Simone. Well, she's off to Africa, because the pressure was so intense. Or we could talk
God,
about Badu, or we could talk about
us.
KRS-One or Chuck D, the Public Enemy. They got a bullseye right there in their projection because they know in telling the truth, folk gonna come at them. They know about COINTELPRO and so forth. And we know repressive regimes all around the world: Latin America, Caribbean, Africa, Europe, the United States, Antarctica, wherever you go, those truth tellers will be targeted. I mean,
Yeah.
look at hip hop artists that just got, they had the they had the death sentence for the brother in Iran. Well, he's not all alone. He's not all alone. There's a whole host of artists all around the world. You got artists in Israel right now in solidarity with precious Palestinian brothers and sisters getting crushed by the Israeli thing. Sudan the same way, Congo the same way, USA. I mean, I'm glad Brother McLemore stepped on out, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Brother McLemore stepped on out. I said, "Oh Lord, Lord, I see." I
Yeah.
see Sister Lauren been stepping out. You got both the Sudanese and the Palestinian thing. So same was true with Madeline Perot, who was just there with our rally in Harlem. Pieces of a dream. We've had some wonderful artists. So I always want to ask J. Cole. I can go on and on. Rhapsody. There's a whole wave of artists who have been, politically involved in different ways. Jasiri and X and Pittsburgh and what have you.
Yeah.
But most of the artists, artistically creative, but politically cowardly. They
Cowardly. Yes.
scared.
I
They
don't
scared.
even, yeah, I feel like the more that I sit in it, because these are my peers in a lot of ways. These are people I know, that I've interacted with, and a lot of folks are even, it's beyond scared. They are greedy. They are they are greedy, and I think that a lot of artists, because of the gatekeeping that we were talking about, and the short-term profiting of these industries, I feel like a lot of artists that we see are not artists at their core. So
Mm,
people with callings who understand their role in society, there are people who have an agenda to become extremely wealthy and famous off of art, off of the business of art. And those are the ones who are the most invested in, the most visibilized, the most platformed, the most celebrated in a lot of ways in our culture, because they don't gravitate into those topics. They don't gravitate into polarizing positions. They don't gravitate towards the things that would give meaning or essence to what they're doing. They prefer to be part of the mind. A lot of art these days, I feel like a lot of art these days is purposed towards distraction, and entertainment versus like thought-provoking or heart-centered resonance. You know what I'm saying? And that's not to say that that's everywhere. I'm saying the most visible of us, the most platformed, the most invested in of us. I believe a lot of people notice that when they don't speak too heavily about politics, they get more positioning. When they don't do this too much, they get to be more visible and make more money off of whatever it is they're trying to do. And a lot of people's goal is fame these days. Fame and wealth. Like, we have, I feel like, in this country, made it so that being famous or being extremely wealthy, or that happening in tandem, is like what so many people are aspiring to, with no intention. Because it's one thing if you want to be wealthy because you invented something that helps people, or like you want
right.
to be, you know what I mean, or you get famous, like it just happens to happen to you because you created something that was really beautiful and a lot of people resonated with. It used to be kind of the exchange of it, but now I really feel like there's an agenda, like everywhere else, to diminish the mind, to diminish the heart-centered practice of art, to diminish the intention-focused vision that art offers us, of a new reality, of a better reality, of a space where we all take care of one another, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because we're all human on the end of the day.
Absolutely.
I know it's a very difficult concept for a lot of people to grasp, but
Well,
like,
think that you're hitting on this spiritual decay and moral decadence of a market-driven society obsessed with spectacle and image and money and position and status. No doubt about this. So that the artists themselves, even when they're talented, they're more concerned about their business and entrepreneurial activity than they are their deeper artistic calling. But my question for you, my dear sister, is what is the source? What goes into the making of your sense of your calling, of your vocation as an artist, so that you are able to both work through it? There's nothing wrong with spectacle, nothing wrong with fame, there's nothing wrong with success if
Right.
it's subordinate to what I would call moral and spiritual greatness. That's what my campaign is about, right?
Right.
Moral and spiritual greatness is about quest for truth and justice and love. So that Martin King is morally and spiritually great. He had high visibility, he had tremendous fame. He didn't have a whole lot of money. He was broke with 10 commandments. Financially as broke as he could be. But you can still have money and still subordinate it to service to others. But what went into the making of you so that you're able to have this kind of vision and calling that you do?
I'm independent. I used to be signed to major labels and I'm not anymore. But I've always been pretty vocal. I think that I have like that fearlessness that you're talking about, where like I know God's got me. I know that history will venerate me. I know that it's never wrong to be on the side of humanity and the side of growth and expansion towards the light. I know that I don't know. I feel like I was born with that intention and purpose for art within me. And I've tried my best to just protect it and to stick to it and be consistent with my moral code. Like I made a promise to myself before I became famous or whatever. I was on a show called X Factor, so I kind of had like a moment in time where I like prep myself for like if it goes this way versus if it goes that way. And when I was if it goes well, there was something about me that like I knew that a lot of famous people or artists have these kind of reputations for treating people like shit or believing that they're people or like kind of getting to the point of egoism. And so I kind of like held a prayer and I said a prayer to God. I was like, if this happens for me, like I want you to protect my spirit. I want you to protect who I am as a person. I don't want to ever get into a place where I forget where I come from or what built me or the people who raised me. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to ever forget that essence or believe myself above anyone just because I can sing and dance. That's not I feel like that's just like a me thing though. And I feel like a lot of people do have that within themselves, but it really is a self-regulation of moral compass. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
at the end of the day, your spiritual connection is yours. It's a very personal relationship. It's a very like some people are like I feel a moral obligation because of my spiritual practice. Does that make sense? It's like I feel
A lot of
like
sense.
life is valuable to me because I believe that it was created with intention, and I believe that we all have that spark that created us within us. And so when I see another human being, I see myself reflected, and I feel like there's a lot of us who feel that way, and then there's a lot of us who don't feel that way or who've been programmed to not feel that way. They might feel that way instinctually, but then they override it because we've been taught to value greed. We've been taught to value this ability to be indifferent to the suffering of the world. If you're able to transcend the suffering and ignore it, then you somehow are more successful in moving through life, because to pay attention is to be in a constant state of sadness. It's to be in a constant state of frustration of just like, why are we doing all this stuff to each other? This makes no sense.
Exactly. I think one of the consequences, though, of being obsessed with narrow success and wealth is that you live a life of maybe tremendous pleasure, but hardly any joy. So much of the culture these days is a joy
Mm,
quest for insatiable pleasures. So you can get any kind of titillation and stimulation and pleasure you want, but your joy is still lacking inside of your soul and your heart because deep, deep joy is tied to not just love, but it's tied to a glow and a warmth that you have inside of you that the world didn't give you and the world can't take away. And when you
Mm,
have that kind of determination, which is tied to the dignity that you took, that's human dignity. Every human being has a dignity and sanctity. That's just my own Christian sensibility, and I believe that. I'm willing to live and die on that, you see.
I agree.
And it means that you are a recipient of a love and a joy if you so choose. But if you opt solely for pleasure and narrow success, you're going to end up living in your big mansion and not having cultivated the capacity for joy and love, which means you still end up empty and vacuous and it's sounding brass and tinkling cymbal in the end. And nobody wants a life just a shadow of a dream and sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. No, you want a life just like your relation to your mom and your daddy and grandma and granddaddy and friends and others of genuine joy.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah, people are definitely that short-term distraction, short-term pleasure, short-term money, like all of that stuff, I think is what's kind of been driving the past decades, really
Oh no,
since the inception of this
it,
country, to
it,
be honest.
well, I think it goes all the way back. In some ways, just that capitalism gave it a particular kind of spin.
But
If you go back 400 years, 700 years, 900 years, what do you see? People living in mansions, kings and queens and monarchs, living like they could break dance every day to the bank. And you got the masses of people living lives of social misery. And you say, wait, what's going on here?
yeah, it's unnecessary. It's really unnecessary.
Absolutely. You got to fight, you got to organize and make sure poor and working people are, in fact, respected. That's why with this campaign, I'm calling for the abolition of poverty, the abolition of homelessness. We don't have to have folk with no house. House ought to be a human right, just like healthcare ought to be a human right. We got to get some significant regulation of the greed of these fossil fuel companies to deal with this ecological crisis. We got to make sure that people gain access to a job with a living wage. We got to make sure police are accountable across the board.
Oh,
We got to make sure militarism around the world. America got 800 military units around the world in special operations in 130 countries. That's an empire. We don't need to be an empire. We need to be a nation among nations. Every empire not just collapses internally, but it has hubris. It thinks so highly of itself. It's satisfied with itself. Can you imagine an artist being so satisfied with herself, or himself, or themselves that they don't want to mature? So what happens to America? You grow powerful, you grow wealthy, you never grow up
never grow up or grow in joy. It's like this
and grow.
constant, I feel
That's
like
right.
this constant erosion of potential. Like every time we start moving towards, okay, let's get to a more free for everyone, a more, like, because we talk about how this country is built on freedom or whatever, but it's built on the backs of indigenous people and slavery. And so
Absolutely.
these principles that we always allude to wanting to conserve in these, in the Declaration of Independence in our Constitution, they when they were written were not applicable to every single person as we are and exist in the United States today, because we are a amalgamation of refugees and immigrants who are also, a lot of us who are here are fleeing wars that were started by empire,
Uh,
are fleeing wars that are probably in the list of 800 bases, you know what I'm saying? Countries that, like, my own family's from Cuba, you know what I'm saying? So like
absolutely.
there's all kinds of reasons why we
1809,
landed in this.
America introduces to Cuba white supremacist segregation. They didn't even have it before. Now, of course, they were under the Spanish, so it's not like that imperialism was so wonderful. But you can just see how you go from one empire to the next,
Yeah.
and then you
It's literally a handoff. It's what happened. What happened to Cuba is a handoff, and that's what's happening in Palestine as well. Like it went from the Ottoman ownership to then the British ownership to then, oh, we own this land, so now we're going to give it to you, and it's now your ownership. And it goes back to imperialism being at the core of so many humanitarian crises across the globe, and the United States being a core player of them. you know what I'm saying, as a descendant, if you will, of the British Empire, you know?
Absolutely. They handed the baton
They literally
right off.
are just handing the baton, or even like mending the, like
Well,
blending the batons, because to
that's
me they all work in tandem with one another.
right.
Once one of them rises to be powerful enough, the other ones are like, well, you know, you're kind of powerful now, so just join us, you know, come join the mafia.
Proper does. No, that's absolutely right. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right. Good God Almighty. But it's such a joy and a blessing to be in conversation with you, my dear sister. It
Thank
really.
you. No, it's such a blessing for me too. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I also wanted to talk a bit more about like your policy ideas and just kind of like what your vision is for bringing this compassion, bringing this reality where we take care of, you know, the working class, middle class folks, and like we make sure that just like what is your vision for economic justice in this country as it is right now?
You see, I want to introduce or reintroduce America to the best of itself, and the best of itself have been movements of black people, of working people, of women, of gay brothers, lesbians, sisters, trans. These are freedom movements. And freedom movements are about what? Putting those sly stones, about artists, called everyday people, at the center of your vision. Because right now we got priorities. Now it's very much
Oh,
about Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and big
sorry,
tech.
say that, say one more time. I think you broke up. One more time.
It's very much about putting everyday people at the center of your vision, because right now we got war priorities. The major priorities in the country are the big benefactors, big money, big military. War manufacturers making big profits right now in Gaza, even though the precious human beings are being killed every day. The same would be true in other places. We talk about Sudan and Congo and what have you. And it means then acknowledging that we begin with resilience and resistance, but we end up with construction. You end up with creation. We're creating an alternative. We're creating an alternative right now. For example, we got escalating fascism in the country. There's no doubt about that. But you
Zero.
just be narrowly anti-fascist if you yourself are part of the fascism. I mean, people say, well, Biden's anti-fascist. No, he got fascist policies. He's a genocide enabler. He's a genocide denier. He's a war criminal. Not just him, but Harris and the others.
Yep.
They're enabling these crimes, you see. So that if you're going to have an anti-fascist movement, you got to get at the roots of it. And
You can't have fascists leading an anti-fascist movement.
how you going to have a genocide enabler leading an anti-fascist movement?
That don't make no sense.
Don't make no sense.
Also, a man who had a part in writing the crime bill.
Or
Like,
architect of another crime against humanity, which was the incarceration of so many of the brothers and sisters I grew up with on the chocolate side of town. I've taught in prisons for now since 1971, which is what, 53 years now, starting in college.
mm,
And I love my brothers. Of course, some of them have done some things they shouldn't have done, but one act doesn't fully exhaust their humanity. And I've met
yeah,
some of the marvelous human beings. Of course, you got Mumia Abu-Jamal and Leonard Peltier and so many others,
yeah,
Bill Brown and the others in jail. And I'm thoroughly convinced that when you militarize abroad, you end up with the militarization at home. I go to schools all the time. I see more police than I see nurses and counselors in elementary schools.
yeah.
They,
There's, it's a system. It's set up for sure.
military
And they also realize that they make a lot of
the
money.
same way. Cop City's gonna spread all the militarization across the nation. It's already there in the Middle East. It's already there in Latin America. It's already there in the Caribbean and so forth. So it's how do you demilitarize and how do you decommodify? How do you push back the obsession with just market, short-term gain? And how do you push back the military? And usually privatizing and militarizing go hand in hand. See, once you privatize with the hierarchy, you're going to need your police to protect your property.
Yeah, because that's really all they do. They're just
And they
little.
go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's
We got,
literally what. And as we
we
see, like
got
a rise in privatization of so many different industries here in the United States. I mean, healthcare is privatized, insurance is privatized.
that's right.
You know, so many things that are. Is water private? I don't, we have private prisons though, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? So even
prison,
just
absolutely.
the concept that people are making money off of incarcerating people, and that it's a business model for many states, like for example in Texas, they're overfilling their prisons so that then they can be like, oh, let's send some inmate, we're overcrowded, so like let's send inmates to private prisons. And all of these folks are pre-trial, haven't seen a trial yet, haven't figured out what's going on, and then they get siphoned into labor
That's right.
that they're not paid for. It's like this I'm seeing it, like, you make housing unaffordable, you make living unaffordable, then people are on the streets, then you make homelessness illegal,
Where they gonna go?
they're going to go to the prisons.
Well,
And this is what I'm
exactly.
saying.
I can
As
go.
long as
I'm in
they
LA right now. I'm
put
Skid
the
Row.
model in place,
45,000 precious folk out there with Master Q with the Church Without Walls that we connect with all the time. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
yeah, it's just
But
it's,
you can
it's
see.
systematically making it illegal to be poor. You know what I mean?
But
So that they can essentially enslave a whole nother class of people, so that they can have a cheap labor force, because people are waking up to the fact that the only reason that inflation exists, the only reason that minimum wages exist, is for profit, is for the people who already have the resources, an exuberant amount of resources, to continue to exploit those resources, own them, and parcel off little tiny stipends to like certain people and none to everybody else.
three individuals have wealth equivalent to 50% of American citizens. 160 million have wealth equivalent to three people. Top 1% own 90% of the wealth. That's worse than the Middle Ages in Europe in that sense. But I also think about that in relation to universities. I think about the repression, of course, because I've been blessed to be there with the students in the encampments in New York at Columbia and
Yeah,
Harvard and Pittsburgh.
I saw that.
Absolutely. And you see, now the university is the dominant response of most universities was repression, in part, back to your point, donors and benefactors, privatized money, organized greed at the top,
Organized.
dictating, President, you ought to do this. If you don't, we're going to push you out. University, you better do this. If not, we're going to withhold our money. And so the students themselves, who are supposed to be at the very center of education,
Mm.
become afterthoughts because the university has been so privatized and therefore militarized when students resist. And you say, I thought we were here to get an education. It's, oh, I see. This is just a commodity that we bought, and we have no center stage presence. We're simply customers coming through supporting a business enterprise called a university.
Literally.
How
That,
sad.
it's been such a revelation.
How sad. You just ripped the cover off. You know, Malcolm X used to say chickens come home to roost. You're going to reap what you sow. The blowback is going to be real. You rip the veil off. And what was it, Brother Cat Williams, the great comic artist? He said this is going to be the year that things get exposed.
And is.
And he's been absolutely right about that. But the important thing for us always, keep the love and justice, not the hatred and revenge at the center of it.
I
That's
agree.
that's the key. That's the key.
I agree. It's hard when you're up against a death cult.
Yes, I agree.
It's so it's kind of the conclusion I've come to, because if you can argue and debate about why children deserve to be obliterated off of this planet for political reasons or for land ownership, like I feel like there's like a serious soul loss going on right now as a collective, especially in the United States, because so many people are so drugged out and disconnected and uneducated by design. To be fair, it is by design.
Right.
A, a lot of people, I genuinely believe, want to do something, but they're so scared and they're so confused and educated about what their choices are, what their options are, and how to transcend the point that they're at, that they end up just not doing anything. But that's why I value people like you who are, you made a choice. You're looking at what's going on, you're seeing the political landscape right now, and you're like, what? I'm going to try to be a voice for justice. I'm going to try to talk to people about what their options are outside of extractiveness and a continued allegiance to billionaire greed, you know?
That's right.
And that's what we're seeing right now on both sides of the aisle. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat in that seat. They just flip-flop power so that they can consolidate their agenda is what they've been doing for decades now. And what we're seeing right now is an amalgamation of that agenda that's been at work for years.
All those
It's
years.
been at work for years. And so we're in a space of reactivity instead of proactivity about how do we deconstruct what is and move towards something new in this country, and not with all the fear mongering, because I feel like with, you know, communism and socialism have received such crazy um reputations, if you will, because of the ways that capitalism and empire thwarts it ever being able to thrive, you know, or the concept ever being able to thrive, you know, because we've never really seen it in actual action. We've only seen dictators say that they're doing something and not actually doing that thing, but just doing dictatorships and empires because that's what we're used to.
Exactly right.
Exactly.
That's why even the artists become so crucial, because the artists are not tied into isms. The artists are tied to integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, willingness to examine themselves, willingness to examine their society and the world, pushing aside the self-righteousness, but holding on to the self-confidence. And so when you have that orientation, you don't have to worry about an ism. You're just concerned about, are you treating people right, especially poor and working people, especially people who have been hated, terrorized, and traumatized. They have to be put at the center, no matter who they are.
Yeah, and that's just the concept of healing, you know what I mean? Like,
That's right.
you have to put the vulnerability at the center in order to start a healing process, because if you don't listen to the needs of your most vulnerable, a nation, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, you know?
Absolutely.
If we have a nation that is full of children who are uneducated and unable to get meals, um you know, parents who don't have access to parenting classes or time off to spend with their children, schools that are more and more every year looking like prisons and divested from and infested with police, you know, militarized police, not even just, you know, somebody who's going to help keep things safe, but someone whose active role is to protect property and protect business interest, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Absolutely.
around, that's not conducive to creating a populace that is going to be strong and able to exemplify these standards of humanity that we tout ourselves as proponents of. I feel like America has this obsession with being like, we're the beacon of freedom and like all this stuff, and it's like, how is that possible when we have the largest prison population in the globe? Can you propose to be the leader of freedom when you are actively, constantly passing laws to criminalize your constituents? How is
Oh,
that possible? It's just complete hypocrisy and a complete like um cognitive dissonance, you know? There's just no, it's all words. And I think that more than ever this year and last year, I think really for me, it's been a process since Trump came into presidency. But that for me was in 2016. And that was my first election that I was ever voting. I was very young. I was a teenager at the time, you know? And I didn't get to go to college, so I wasn't educated to that point, you know, academically, but I kept up with everything just because I love to learn. I love to read. I
I
love to
tell you this,
know.
you may have never gone to college, but a college went through you.
Amen. Okay.
Through you,
Yeah, but we
because
have like a very
you
I love
brilliant, got a
I love
critical
and I
mind,
love
got an
and
open that makes all the difference in the world. How do we remain love warriors, freedom fighters, wounded healers, joy spreaders, and still have a smile on our face with a sense of our own unique style?
yeah.
You see, that's for me what it's all about. That's what this campaign is all about. And I know, that you've just been so kind. I know just the fact you've given me this kind of thing, but I hope people who are listening, who are interested in the campaign, is it all right just put out the CornellWest2024.com?
Absolutely.
Let's
Yeah,
see.
no, I'm gonna share
Keep
this
going.
on, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go
Oh,
ahead.
no,
Say.
no, no, you go right ahead. You go right ahead.
Oh, so I'm gonna post this onto my story as well, and I'm gonna post a link on Twitter as well.
Oh,
Also them to